today with a group of like-minded patriots, and we're congregating here on the Lexington Green. And we are also here to commemorate the events of April 19th, 1775, and talking about the story of not just the fighting here, but what went into it. The training with the men, Jonas Clark and the Black Robe Regiment, Joseph Warren and the political leadership, John Adams, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, Robert Treat Paine, those men, Paul Revere, who helped organize and got ready for the events of the day, Reverend William Emerson in Concord, Captain William Smith in Lincoln. And we're giving everybody that comes here a feel of the battle, a feel of what happened here. Not just the fight in the early morning hours, but also the fight that came here later in the afternoon. From the British ambush here to when they're on their precipitous retreat almost a rout back in the coast.
No, I want to post that in the west.
Well, it's working now with the new batteries.
Oh, that's good.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's still morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Before the afternoon's events, we wanted to take the opportunity and do a guided tour of the Lexington Green.
But
Obviously, we're here. Yes, ma'am.
the Battle Green guides are working right here, so if you could move down.
That's fine. We're going to be over here near the Pulpit Rock, though. We have a lot of people. So, what we wanted to do is just, give you an opportunity to take a look at the green. Obviously, we're here for a reason. Just ignore my 21st century accoutrement. Obviously, on the morning of April 19th, 1775, events here had changed the course of not only American history, but world history. What I want to do is just guide you to some of the seminal points of the Battle Green to give you an idea as to what had happened. If you look here at this monument behind me, this marks the spot where the old meeting house was. Lexington had been incorporated out of West Cambridge in 1713. Its first pastor was a man by the name of John Hancock. He was the grandfather of his namesake, John Hancock, who we knew later on. He had a parsonage down Hancock Street, which is now Hancock Street, and it was the center of life for town. He had been the pastor here for over 50 years. He dies in the 1750s. His successor is a young man by the name of Jonas Clark. Jonas Clark now becomes the pastor of the Lexington congregation. Hancock's family still lives in the old parsonage, and eventually Clark ends up marrying one of Hancock's granddaughters, or John Hancock's cousin. It's very important because Jonas Clark was one of the early patriots. Back in those days, you've heard the term Black Robe Regiment, and Jonas Clark was definitely one of those. Leading up to April 19th, there were many acts that were taking part. In 1760, George III succeeds George II as the King of England. At this point in time, as a complete shock not only to his family dynasty, but also to the political structure of Great Britain, he ends up embracing the political philosophy of his grandfather's and his great-grandfather's political enemies, the Tories. At this point in time, the Tories are those people who believe in the divine right of kings and not the rule of Parliament. Many things are happening at this point in time in England, including the jailing of a leading Whig minister by the name of John Wilkes. An angry crowd breaks him out of the Tower of London, leading to a series of events that threaten to bring the British Empire to its knees. One of the first places the Tories decide they have to start is here in the American colonies. In the late 1760s, early 1770s, a man by the name of Adam Smith had written The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations was a book that was describing the economic conditions of the time, the first of its kind. He had written that the fastest growing economic power in the world were the British North American colonies right here. And he could foresee the power becoming so great that the future capital of the British Empire would no longer be London, but probably Philadelphia. If you are a Tory in Great Britain who's trying to consolidate power over there, that absolutely frightens you. That explains why so many of the punitive acts that were put on the colonies had really nothing to do with maintaining the British Army here. Was it needed? It had nothing to do with paying off the debt. They paid off worse debts before. American blood had been spent on land and sea during the 7 Years' War in many theaters beside America. They're the ones to help conquer Havana, Cuba from the Spanish and form the bulk of Wolfe's army to drive the French out of Quebec. Fast forward to Salem in February 1775. The order is given to seize a couple of the cannon in Salem. That was one of the centers of Patriot power after the Tories and the Redcoats had taken Boston in the late 1760s. A man by the name of Colonel Leslie is dispatched to take the cannon. A man named Paul Revere, who had organized an extensive alarm system around the area, had warned the inhabitants of Salem, and they came out with a militia. They decided to attack on a Sunday morning when the inhabitants were going to be in church. They had quickly come out with their pastor, and they had faced off against Leslie's stunned redcoats, where they literally had muskets aimed at each other. Leslie realized he couldn't get his way out of it, so the minister said, I'm going to work out a compromise with you. You can march your men across the bridge. It's still there today. It's set to cement. And he says, you're going to turn your men and you're going to march them back again. You told me your orders were to march over and march back, but you're not getting the cannon. Leslie had to comply. To that day, that area is known as Leslie's Retreat. 2 months later, Lord Dartmouth, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, issues an order to General Gage, who's not only the governor of Massachusetts, he's also the supreme British commander of the British forces here, which is another conflict of interest. What ends up happening is they are told to seize the powder up and down the coast, including in Concord, Massachusetts. Concord is now the de facto capital of Massachusetts. That's where the legislature reforms. That's where the head of the armies are, the militias that are now completely in Patriot and Whig hands. And they are formed to be great military units, and they are drilled extensively, including some deserting British NCOs who come into the ranks to help train them. Many of these men had experience in the 7 Years' War. In fact, you had a larger percentage of the American men that day who had more battle experience than the British rank and file did. You don't hear that in history books, but it is true, which helps explain the events of the day. On the morning of April 18th, Gage issues a secret order to his men. Even the rank and file and his closest officers do not know. They are going to march down this road, which is the King's Highway, now Mass Avenue, to Concord. They march to Concord, and they're going to take the stores, and they're going to march back. They think it's going to be a pretty easy enterprise. They send advanced scouts over. That's the end of it. Well, Gage tells one individual who ends up telling a man named Joseph Warren. Joseph Warren becomes one of the leaders of the Massachusetts colony when the Adams and Hancock and Robert Tree Payne and the others have to go down to Philadelphia, which they are on their way to at this point in time. Adams and Hancock are staying at the Hancock parsonage with Hancock's family. Warren finds the information. He tells Paul Revere, who has an extensive alarm system. Revere sets off in the middle of the night, just before it, sends out a bunch of riders along with him. He comes into Lexington, warns Adams and Hancock what's happening, and also lets them know they better get out because they're standing orders to arrest them. About 1 o'clock, Captain John Parker, who is the head of the Lexington Alarm Band, the militia, the Minutemen, forms his men out. About 130 of them, 140 of them all together, maybe more. 30 of them were at Buckman Tavern, 10 were sent to the Hancock Courthouse to protect Adams and Hancock. Well, after an hour passes, they determine, well, there must be wrong information. They're not coming this way. He dismisses his men, except for maybe 30 at Buckman Tavern. Again, 10 near the Hancock Courthouse. What had happened was, 2 of the 3 riders he sent out came back. One of them comes back 3-4 hours later. Says, look, I'm late in coming back because I had to hide over Menotomy, which is now Arlington. He said, they're coming on the road. They're going to be here in a half hour. It was 5:15 in the morning, and it was going to be more like 15 minutes before they arrived. Behind this gentleman here is another marker. It's where the belfry sat. This belfry now sits up at the top of that hill. It's been rebuilt. Belfry rings out. Parker assembles his men. Unfortunately, only 40 to 45 were able to assemble. Why don't you follow me down here? And I'll keep talking. Why don't you go right down to where Parker's Rock is and just stay there, Louis? Those men are going to mark out the spot where we're going, but you guys can walk with me. Now, at this point in time, the Lexington Minute companies and the alarm companies are dispersed. You have some of the men here, some of them forming. A lot of them are coming in from other parts of town. Some of them are in the meeting house getting ammunition. The British forces are made up of 11 companies of regulars and 1 battalion of Marines. This is consequential because the man that's leading it is Lieutenant Colonel Smith. He was a veteran of the 7 Years' War in Europe, a middling officer, nothing great but nothing poor. His second in command was John Pitcairn, who was a crackerjack Marine officer and the ranking Marine in North America. Problem was, Marine officers never had experience in dealing with these Army troops. Pitcairn takes his second in command, a young Lieutenant Jesse Adair, to lead the advanced company of 300 men. And that's what's going to bring us to where we are now. Where these gentlemen are is the Rock. This is roughly where we believe Parker lined his men. Notice he lined them up here along the along the road into Bedford. He did this for a reason. He did it, one, to protect the town and Adams and Hancock, and two, they were not going to do anything unless the red-coated forces did something first. That's very key to remember during this day. If I could take the gentlemen in the audience, just pardon me for a minute, ladies. Why don't you gentlemen just kind of line up along the Rock? Louis, why don't you take Parker's spot right there? And if the gentlemen can just kind of line up in a row. I want to give everybody an idea.
This way or that way?
This way. Just line up.
Gentlemen?
Yes, please. Line up in a parallel line here, gentlemen, to the Rock. Come on, gentlemen. Join us here. I think we'll have almost as much people to give us a good, accurate representation of what happened. Now, down the road, remember, the British orders are to march to Concord. The powder's over there. They could care less about Adams and Hancock initially. Yes, sir.
Were they just after powder?
They were after powder. Well, there were also standing orders to go after Adams and Hancock, but you don't send 1,500 men to go after
Nothing about firearms and Gage's order?
Oh, yeah. They weren't to fire first.
No.
Seize arms and military stores
Yes.
were the actual words in Gage's letter.
They were to
To
seize
take
the
away
powder.
the guns, the people's
They were to
guns and
seize the
ammunition.
powder, the cannon, the
And the
weapons,
gun.
and the ammunition and the powder, yes.
Okay.
But there were also standing orders to get Adams and Hancock wherever they were too. But the purpose for this expedition of 700 men was not to go after them. Although they did send a party of men to go after them. It was to go down this road. So, they go down to the road. All of a sudden, Lieutenant Adair sees Parker's men lined up. There's only 45, but there's another 30 coming in off the green. Adair sees the men. He decides on his own initiative, well, I can't leave these men here on our flank. He goes to the right of the meeting house, and all of a sudden you have 300 men, basically where those people are, coming right down, stopping where that, basically where that tree is now. Now there's an impasse. You have Parker's men who aren't moving. You have Adair's advance company who are not moving. You have 2 British officers on horseback. One's a Major Mitchell, one is Lieutenant Sutherland. I mention these 2 particular men because Sutherland was not supposed to be there. He was an aggressive officer, and he was looking for some action. Mitchell led the party to reconnoiter the Hancock Clark house earlier in the morning, and they captured Revere before Revere scared him off, and they ended up releasing him here. He scared him by telling him there were 500 men in the countryside. They cut his bridle and said, good, you're not taking your horse, you can walk back into town. Well, Mitchell was in Lincoln. One of the alarm men had come out of his house thinking they were a party of patriots, said, where are the redcoats? Mitchell says, I'll show you where the redcoats are. He slashes him across the head. That was the first blood spill that day. A man named Josiah Nelson. Nelson bandages himself really quickly and very angrily, starts alarming his other friends. He'll be back during the day looking for Mitchell. But at this point in time, those are the 2 men. Adair is a junior officer. Sutherland and Mitchell are senior to him. They come up. All of a sudden, Parker and Smith see what's happening, and they're incensed. Why is it there here? They're supposed to be going over there. Parker all of a sudden sees another 300 men. He says, okay, there's 600 to 700 men against my 45. There's another 30 or so men near the common. That's where they get the 77 men. And there's some of the men in the meeting house, and that's not even half of the men I have. So he starts thinking, okay, we're going to disperse. Now, disperse does not mean surrender. It does not mean, oh, we made a big mistake, or this is so regrettable. It means you take your arm, you disperse to the woods and reform until these guys are gone. They're not attacking. Unless they attack the town, we're not going to do anything. Specifically. Except support our other men when they come back. Well, at this point in time, Pick here runs up first with his horse. He demands Parker's men to surrender. They don't do it. Adair had already given the order, and then Sutherland and Mitchell, on their own, start ordering the same thing. At this point in time, a shot goes off. Now, there have been many misses who fired the shot. I can tell you categorically, Sam Adams wasn't sitting in the woods with a shotgun. That did not happen. You did not have snipers on the roof of Buckland Tavern. You did not have that happen either. The reason being, they would have put their people in sudden peril, including themselves. So it's very unlikely that it was one of the Patriots that fired the first shot. It wasn't Pitcairn either, and it wasn't Smith. They were very determined they weren't going to do anything but get that powder at this point in time, which is bad enough. One of the British soldiers that was captured that day corroborated some of the Patriot eyewitnesses. They said they heard a pistol shot, maybe two. The only ones with pistols were the British officers mounted. And people swear that they saw smoke come in out of Mitchell's gun and Sutherland's gun almost simultaneously. So those are probably the two culprits that did it. However, when that happened, the British rank and file, no offense ladies, it's just metaphorical, end up firing into the ranks. But before they do that, Parker orders his men to disperse. So before they fire their pistol shots, Parker orders his men to disperse. So why don't you gentlemen, about face, kind of walk toward the houses there. You don't have to do it in any particular order. Freeze! Sir, you're dead. You too. Why don't you kind of crawl to that house right over there, kind of stay. Just go by that tree. Just walk by the tree. You, sir, you're dead. You turn around, you start shooting your camera toward the British. You're dead. You turn around and you start firing your flag toward the British lines. Most of these men had their backs turned when the firing started. There was not some open action fight here at this point in time. Their backs were turned. Most of these men, 6 of them were shot in the back. This gentleman right up there owns that house, named Jonathan Harrington. He manages to crawl to his door where he sees his wife and his 8-year-old son, and he dies on his own doorstep. This brave man here with the camera, Monroe, Jedi Monroe, he's a cousin to Sergeant Monroe down at the Monroe Tavern. He's determined he's going to fight along with Parker's cousin. Those men turn around and they fire, and they're cut down with bayonets. They're the only 2 men who are shot firing, but they're 2 men against hundreds. One of the men killed was a man out of the meeting house from Welburn, and he was trying to escape. He gets shot. So most of these men are shot. At this point in time, an angry Pitcairn and an angry Smith order their men, have an assembly beat, they get there and they cheer, and they march off to Concord. But that isn't the end of the story, because these men here in Lexington regroup. 8 dead, 9 wounded. The wounded are walking wounded. They can fight again, and they will. They get to the bridge. At the bridge, they split their party up in a couple of different sections. The section left to guard the bridge all of a sudden faces 500 Minutemen and militiamen from Concord. Colonel Buttrick in Concord has the bulk of the army there. They march down, and they end up confronting the British at the bridge. This time it's reversed. You have 500 men against 93. Again, the British rank and file fire first against orders. The Patriots return fire and they sweep the bridge, and there's a retreat to Concord. At this point in time, the reason for the reticence is not because of a reluctance to stand up for what you believed in. They did not believe the British forces were going to actually fire live ammunition, firing ball. They get word they fired ball here. They saw them firing ball at the bridge. And at a place called Merriam's Corner, again, 2 British rear guardsmen who are protecting the retreat turn fire into the waiting militiamen in the hill. It's a big mistake. They're outnumbered again and they're driven out. A few hours later, Parker's men reassemble at the Lincoln-Lexington line. Smith's column's taking heavy casualties. They're fatigued. They're being pressed by about 1,500 Patriots at this point. Parker, now with his almost after the dead, probably 130 men now, is standing there waiting for him. As soon as they get into the line, bang! Smith comes off his horse. Several casualties. Pitkin comes off his horse, but he's not wounded. The line almost collapses right there. It's known as Parker's Revenge. So this men got their revenge toward the end of the day. They faced them all the way down, they retreated this way, and they faced off them again. At this point in time, a relief column came in from Boston when they were getting word there was trouble from Percy. General Percy was an acting brigadier. He comes in with another 700-800 men. He quickly saves Smith's column. They were almost ready to surrender. He takes that column right about here, fires into the meeting house. For the third time, the Lexington Minutemen have their blood up, and so do the rest of them, because they hit a meeting house. They chase them all the way back into Boston. British are fortified in Boston Neck. They fortify Bunker Hill at that point, the first time it's fortified. And because of the British Navy, they can't quite get there, but they escape. Patriot losses that day were about 49 killed. The British were in excess of 73, 74, maybe more. But there was open order fighting. There was in the woods fighting. Both sides could fight in open order. Both sides could fight in the woods. They were drilled. Obviously, the more disciplined British soldiers, you'd expect to have more precision, but they had less battle experience man for man. However, they were very good at the flanking companies and fighting in the woods. That's where more of the Patriots were killed. And they were able to press them all the way into Boston until 11 months later they were driven out under the command of George Washington. So folks, that's the story of Lexington Green. In the late 1700s, Lexington disinterred its 7 dead. The one dead from Woburn is in Woburn, and they buried them under that obelisk. They are there to this day. So if you have any questions, I'll be here for a few minutes. Yes, ma'am.
What was Mitchell's first name?
I forget. I think it may have been Thomas, but I forget. He disappears from the historical record after this day.
Oh, okay. Because a great-great-great-grandfather of mine answered the call. It was Abel Mitchell.
Oh no, Mitchell was a British man.
Oh,
He was one of the enemy. There was another Mitchell. There were Mitchells on the other side too, certainly.
yeah.
Well, you're welcome.
Who's buried in the old burying ground?
Jonas Clark is. John Parker is. The original graves of those men are still there, markers.
Oh, okay.
So,
But they're
yeah,
the colonists, the Americans.
the Americans, correct. You may have had 1 or 2 British who died here. They could have been buried over there too. But some of them didn't either surrender or they just fell here.
There's a lot of Mitchell. I've been here in 1902.
Oh. Oh, yeah.
Related to Barry McWayman?
No. Bedford. Mentioned. Wareham? No.
Final Channing Fowler.
Related to Chris Barry?
Yes, I am.
She might. She's a shelter dog. I don't know.
Her son.
Oh, she's oh, the best. Allie. Allie.
70 years old. No. I didn't really know.
Yeah.
You're talking about my brother Chris, son Christopher Barry.
I don't know.
He's a lieutenant.
Well, I think.
And they had reconnoitered it maybe a month ago, but their information was incomplete. You know, they just did not read the countryside well. People could tell they were in disguise. People could tell who they were. They were traveling on this avenue, which actually was at sundown the night before. And they said, "These guys were." And they could tell. They had a servant with them who was a black man, and he was eating at a separate table. They would, if they had their servants with them, they would have all sat together. So, you know, it was a very poorly kept secret that they were eyeballing the area. The only thing that was not known until Gage's order got to the Americans was what they were going to do exactly when. They knew the power was always there. The countryside was ready any time for trouble. So that was not a surprise. What happened here was nobody says, okay, well, the 4 points obviously going to be Lexington. Nobody would have called. And so they really found out how poor a job they did. They thought they were going to go in, come out. Again, they didn't think there would be enough force to stop them. They thought they would say, hey, by the time these guys find out what we're doing, we're going to have 700 to 1,000 men, 15 potentially come back and forth. They get in trouble, the relief column's going to save us. And they miscalculated badly. In fact, the orders for the relief column were about 3 hours too late. And people speculated, what if it had been earlier? Well, it would have been a bigger disaster for the British because they would have been stuck in Concord much longer. It would have been harder getting 1,500 men out than 700, right? Especially with Parker's men blocking the road up here, there would have been a disaster for them. So it was fortuitous that Percy came in when he did. But even he started having to leave because they were heavy casualties.
One thing about the colonists, they were hunting fish, so they were vicious. Probably better marksmen than
Yeah, they were. Although you had some British, you had some Englishmen too to fight. The thing was, people don't understand battle experience.
Yes.
A lot of the rank and file Englishmen at that point did not have battle experience. Some of the NCOs did, some of the officers did, but not all of them. Here, the younger men that were here, no, they did not. But so, if they were over 30, 35, which a lot of them were, they had some battle experience. They had been drilling incessantly for the last year, so it gave them a parity. And again, the British rank and file were not taught to think individual. Although it's funny, because of poor orders and poor coordination, they fire first out of panic. They don't do it to be insubordinate. They do it because they feel, well, I'm out. Bang, let's do it. Sure. These two guys fired, let's do it. And they get killed. And so when they're caught in individual actions, with a couple of exceptions, they do very poorly. Americans not so. Yes, sir.
Just a question about the Revolutionary War in general, not this day specifically, but is it true that when either sides were evenly matched on those occasions, on those specific battles, that the colonists did win battles?
Yes.
I've read the claim that colonists never won a battle, and
progressive revisionism.
thank you. That's
Yeah,
why
it
I'm
is.
here.
Yeah, in fact,
And
you're
there's
told
no romance between the French alliance. They were only in it for themselves, and all.
they did very little. In fact, it was strange because most of the English rank people in Great Britain, English people, were opposed to this action. When the French come in, they have to defend their home island, so guess what happens? They're not able, not that they were able to affect a lot of support with that government, but they do eventually.
Yeah.
When the French land here, they cause more disasters and trouble. The Spanish cause more disasters and trouble. The only time they perform is at Yorktown, where they're still outnumbered by the
Navy.
Americans. Well, their Navy, yes, the Battle of the Capes. They happen to catch one of the worst admirals in the French Navy against one of the better French ones. And that's a rarity. So that was it. And even without that, Americans probably would have won eventually. After 1776, the British High Command realizes they're not going to conquer America. That's when they start going into more total war and plunder. But understand, it's anathema to most of the British back home. You had more British supporting the cause of the revolution than you had American Tories and loyalists here. You don't hear that. The other thing, too, you're told Washington only won one battle. That's garbage. He won more battles than he lost. He won Princeton.
Yeah.
He won Monmouth, Trenton. He won here.
I know this is far afield,
Right.
but I'd like to know what the agenda is besides,
Well,
all
I
these
think
other claims.
think
He
it's-
didn't win this. He didn't win that. We didn't win
I think
anything.
it's a demoralization because what's kept
Why?
because and not just Washington, but the American ideal and the American Revolution is what kept the country going for so long. The first thing they do 100 years ago, call it neo-Toryism, they start talking about how Benedict Arnold was the best general we had. That was garbage. He was not. And the other thing is, you don't talk about Nathaniel Greene, who was the best general that Washington had. He's out of Rhode Island. He goes down south and he helped mop up the British in the south. Washington is a very good tactical commander. Nobody ever claimed he was a military genius, but he was very good tactically. He was a mapnik, could survey. And of course, if you know the ground, you know the terrain.
He learned from his mistakes.
Yeah, well, they all do.
What about Daniel Morgan and Daniel Morgan down south? And
Morgan, too. Not just down there, but up here. Morgan's up here at the Siege of Boston.
really, not
Oh,
just
yeah.
cow pens and all that.
And Cowpens,
Yeah.
Saratoga. Morgan, not Arnold's the one that really does the job at Saratoga. And General Lincoln, who's from South Shore here. His family's Lincoln, Mass is named for it, way before he was born. Again, no military genius, but he was more competent than what they give him credit for. And he's wounded at Saratoga too, but you don't hear about him. You hear about Arnold.
Well, in the picture, he's the one looking at the artist in the picture at the Saratoga surrender in the archives. He's the one guy looking at you. Everybody else is not.
Yeah.
He's looking at each other.
Yeah, and he's supposed to be wounded. And he's also obviously in this Yorktown surrender portrait too. So you hear a lot of stories. Arnold was a troublemaker from day one. And he was more of a malignancy than ever. So, again, revisionist, you know, name your poison. You know what progressive revisionism has been over the last several decades. So that's what you're dealing with. And definitely here this day, you hear other things too. I mean, you had black soldiers fighting here. The first tribal Indian soldiers to get involved in the American Revolution are here. They fight with the Americans. The Stockbridge Indians. What was left of the native praying Indians, they come here. Crispus Attucks was also a descendant of a native tribe. It was a Christian tribe. So you have all sorts of action and you have all sorts of interaction. That's what explains this day because you know, it wasn't like, oh, they showed up and, oh, yeah, they just had the fight and that was the end of it. There's a huge story, very detailed behind it, including Jonas Clark, including the, training of the arms and, Joseph Warren and keeping the army together outside of Boston. There's all that sort of thing.
Thanks for the thought.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Enjoy it?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
I'll go find some ice.
I'll try.